So it's a group of blind men who've never come across an elephant before and come to know it by touching it. From different angles, each one describes a different part of the elephant based on what they experience. So one is holding the trunk and he's saying, this is some new kind of snake. And then you have another one who's feeling the tusk and he says, would you stop? It's like a giant spear. And there's one guy at the back who's looking not to get sat on, but he's holding the tail and he says, it's like a frazzly type of rope. And there's another with their hand around a giant leg saying, well, it actually feels like a tree trunk to me. And so on and so forth. And they begin to fall out because they can't agree on what the others are saying. And the moral of the parable is usually taken to be that we human beings, we have a tendency to claim ownership of the truth. And it's based on our limited subjective experience of life. And we ignore other people's similar limited objective experiences, which may also be true. I had an experience of this. Looking through a mirror dimly. So as Christians, we recognize that the truth is also seeking us out, a shepherd looking for his sheep. So just, I thought it was a modest aim when I started writing this talk, but it got very difficult. I got very deep very quick. So the point I'm trying to make the inspiration comes from a famous address given by Pope Benedict XVI, Regensburg, the 12th of September 2006. It was a very famous and for some people infamous address. But Pope Benedict's primary intention was to talk in a university setting like this about the place where different branches of knowledge are pursued, and to talk about faith and reason. And towards the end of his talk, he described a truncation or narrowing of our understanding of human reason. And Father Billy has already alluded to it. I was afraid he was going to say everything that I wanted to say before I got here. So I'm going to focus on this narrowing of human reason. And I use an image to describe it. People who are familiar with horse racing know that certain horses have to be blinkered when they're put into the stalls. And you blinker the horse because their eyes are slightly on the side of their head. There's so many distractions, and some of them are quite temperamental, and it just focuses them on a path ahead towards the finish line, and it can really help some horses. So for Pope Benedict, he says, the modern way we use our reason has become blinkered and truncated, and he wanted to encourage a restoration to grander proportions. He said it's like a bird with a wounded wing trying to fly. So I just want to talk a bit about that and hopefully encourage your own reflections. So he said at the end of the address, he said the intention here is not entrenchment, not to dig ourselves a trench and say we're going to stand our ground, or negative criticism where we're always pulling down. He said it is to broaden our concept of reason and how we apply it. And he said we'll succeed in doing so only if faith and reason come together in a new way. If we overcome, and this is where he gets a bit technical, the self-imposed limitation of reason to what is empirically falsifiable. If we disclose again its grand horizons. So we want to unpack this statement. Self-imposed limitation placed on our reason. And this mention of the empirically falsifiable, that's where it gets a bit technical, I think. And to disclose again its vast horizons. So talking about the blinkers, I think, first of all, I want to give you an understanding of human reason so that we have something to begin with. And going back to that parable of the elephant again, human reason is the way we reach out towards all of reality in order to experience it and take it in its different facets and to understand it. It is the blind men striving towards the elephant, experiencing what they touch, or if they had the gift of sight or whatever, understanding it, describing, forming judgments, comparing different things and contrasting them, and then expressing it all through words, through convictions, and ultimately giving direction to life. So saying this thing is hard like a spear, or it's wriggly like a rope. But human reason isn't just this engagement and reception of reality. We need to go further, and as was mentioned in the bio, I take great inspiration from an Italian priest, Father Luigi Giussani. He has a great book called The Religious Sense. And in this book, he talks about our human reason and its dynamic. He says, knowledge is the encounter between human energy and a presence. So you think of the blind man and the elephant that's present. It is the event where the energy of human knowledge is assimilated to some object. So we are the subject, the human person, and the object is the elephant or whatever it happens to be, the knower and the known. It can be any object, not just something physical or material. There's intellectual objects and structures and experiences that we undergo or experience, systems of ideas, the experience of joy. We can engage that as something to be understood. So we desire to encounter and understand what's taking place without and within. And insofar as what's assimilated or taking into our inner life or soul matches the reality, well then we're in some sense in the truth. There's a correspondence, to use the idea of Aquinas. All the partial descriptions of the elephant have some element of truth in them. They correspond to some part of reality. And if the idea we have in our mind doesn't correspond, well then our understanding is flawed, in some way false. So Father Giussani goes on, he said, it's not just the capacity to take in every piece of the jigsaw. It is that ever greater capacity. So you have the trunk, the tusks, the leg, the tail, you name it. It is also the capacity to put everything together in a holistic vision. That's crucial. It's not just the ability to take the pieces as they come, but to situate them, to recognize the interplay, the respective value and significance of each of the things we encounter, and to put them within a grand narrative, framework, or worldview. So Father Giussani used to tell his students to close their eyes. And he said, when you open them, imagine it's the first time that you ever looked at reality. What might strike you as you open your eyes? So there's so many colors, shapes, textures, grades of surface, sounds rough and smooth, all your faces looking down at me now that I'm taking in. The beauty, attraction, the mystery and value of reality. Because the world communicates to us in some way, even as we communicate ourselves. Imagine the wonder of a blind man whose sight is suddenly restored and looks at this colossal creature before him. How captivated we are by the beauty of the ocean or a clear night sky, that sense of wonder. So we question the reality, we say, wow, and we're also questioned by it because we're not outside observers. We're not cold, impartial scientific minds, as the scientific worldview might say, but we're part of this very world that we take in. Free and intelligent subjects, confronted with such questions as Father Billy mentioned earlier on. Where did all of this come from? And I too, where do I come from? That's what drives the religious sense. What does it all mean? Why do these things seem to speak to me and provoke me with such force? And what direction should I give my life? How should I navigate good and evil on this journey? How should I use my body, or whatever it happens to be? And the great ultimate question, is there a creator? A God, or as some would say, many gods or none? And so we're groping by our own power at times towards the answer. They're the Mount Everest questions to which our human reason, given its full wingspan, strives to reach. The religious heart of every person, because we all have these questions. We can ignore them, but we can't deny that they're there. This is the flowering of human reason, a total openness and commitment to follow the clues, or else just to sit with the trunk of the elephant in our hands and kind of say, look, it's some new snake, and that's all it is, okay? The others don't know what they're talking about, and as long as I'm right, that's all that matters. So we come to the truncation or narrowing of human reason, the image of blinkering, which in some way narrows our perspective and focus and squeezes out the wonder of reality. So I can only barely approach the question today, but I hope people will be interested enough to explore further. So we must say that blinkering is a tendency and temptation for human nature, you could say universally. Go to the Bible and we have this blinkering which we call the idols. St. Paul says people mistake creatures for the Creator and worship the created, in some way exalting the part in place of the whole. So the truncation of reason has deep roots. It goes back to the very beginning of philosophy. Philosopher before Socrates, Protagoras was his name, he's recorded as saying, man is the measure of all things. He measures what is that it is and what isn't that it isn't. And that's a tendency that has been there all along. The human mind is the measure, and what we can't understand or take in, it's as if it doesn't exist. So in the aftermath of the Reformation and the wars of religion, all that fighting that took place in Europe, the 30 Years' War, the blame was laid decisively at the feet of faith and not reason. Their solution was to say every kingdom has to have the religion of its ruler, because it's the religion that's causing the problem. And after that time, that great divisive time, some of the geniuses of the era looked to human reason to give new hope on which to build a future. Something pure, they said, reason is. It's above all these divisions. And cue the era of the Enlightenment. So he looked to René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy. And many of you are probably more familiar than I am with him, but he began his great project with the dictum, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. So he felt that, I can nearly doubt everything. I could be deceived in everything. But the fact that I even think or doubt, that's a sure sign that I exist. It's the indubitable fact. And he went from there then to elevate thought and the mind as the sure and safe path. If we compare Descartes' principle with something similar that was written 1,000 years before that by St. Augustine, we can notice the truncation or reduction, because St. Augustine too had the skeptics around him saying, how can you know for sure? And he replied, like Descartes, he said, in order to think, I have to exist. There has to be an I. There's no such thing as thought in a vacuum. But he said, not just to think or doubt. In order to be glad, he said, I have to exist. In order to love, I have to exist. None of these things are a vacuum. They all have a conscious subject. And so for Descartes and modern philosophy, the person is reduced to the thought, the intellectual activity. The head and heart are sundered. And it's a tragic divorce and the breaking up of the medieval synthesis of faith and reason, where they work together as the two wings of a bird. So from Descartes, we can trace this narrowing or truncation down to the early 20th century, and there was a group, very prominent philosophy, the logical positivists, and they taught a very severe reduction. They said, all we can know with certitude is what we can measure and experiment with. So the important term here, which Father Billy, I'd say, could talk a lot better than I could on this, is empirical evidence. It's scientific if it can be tested by experiment and proved to be true. It has to be falsifiable. So it's not science if it can't potentially be falsified. So the fruit of this reduction or focus, it's like a horse. The horse runs better if it's focused. In the scientific realm, the progress has been astounding, as we know. But we can't say that it's an unmitigated triumph or without major problems. And some of them have already been alluded to. But the truncation of human reason is without doubt, I think. If we understand reason as an openness to reality according to all its factors, well, then somebody who operates in this way has really reduced it. So it's like coming home on your birthday, for instance, as an example. I really love this example. There's a cake on the table, and with your scientist hat on, and if you only look at it scientifically, you'll say, well, its diameter is 30 centimeters. Its chemical composition is such and such. Here's the likely effect its molecules will have on my palate. And if you start talking like that to your mother, who baked this cake for you on your birthday, I don't know what she'll do. She'll probably slam it against your face or something. Because its deeper existential meaning is left out of the circle of what's reasonable if you have that narrow understanding. Pascal had a lovely line. He said, the heart too has its reasons, which reason, and that is reason reduced to just measuring, knows nothing. He says, we know the truth not only by the reason, but by the heart. So for the most important things in life, such as God, the soul, the experience of love and joy and all these things, they remain outside that measure to an extent. And I think it's good to remember, and again has already been said in some ways, these shifts begin in the minds of talented individuals, geniuses. There's usually some aspect of the truth that someone like Descartes captures, and it takes hold firstly in the academic world, in a theatre like this, and in the university setting, and then seeps into the world of culture and education, and then suddenly the whole society is caught up. And we've already heard the word here from Father Billy, scientism, that Bishop Barron speaks so well about, a widespread belief that scientific knowledge can explain everything in the cosmos. Religious explanations are obsolete. And Father Barron, or Bishop Barron, often talks about the famous back and forth between Napoleon and the mathematician Laplace. And Napoleon says, "Where does God fit into your mathematical work?" And Laplace answers, "I have no need of that particular hypothesis." Okay, the instrumentalization of reason. So there was the thinker Francis Bacon. He said, "Nature is put under inquisition and forced to reveal her secrets." That was his understanding of human reason. It's instrumentalized. It is to extend our dominion over nature and submit it to our will. So no longer, as has been mentioned, is nature revered as the work of God. The industrial appropriation of nature for control and power and commercial gain, that's the root of so many of our problems nowadays, to use rather than to appreciate. So I have to start landing the plane now. So Romano Guardini wrote in his letters to Lake Como, "When we begin to refashion things in our image rather than God's, we ourselves become displaced and disjointed. Strangely enough, by asserting only our humanity, we lose what makes us essentially and beautifully human." So the scientific perspective needs to be complemented, again saying what was said already, with the mystical contemplative vision, which sees the logos of creation or the law of creation from a faith perspective. So just checking now how far I'll go on with this. One last thing to say about the truncation of reason is the loss of imagination. Imagine dumping the book of Genesis because it's not scientific, okay, and how much is lost in that. Or the search for the historical Jesus, where the historical critical method is applied to the Bibles, and they say, well, we'll get rid of all the garbage and we'll find Jesus behind it all and pull him like a rabbit out of a hat. And the real interesting thing here is that, as somebody pointed out, those scholars who produce versions of the historical Jesus, that the historical Jesus looked a lot more like the scholars themselves than Jesus. And it's a bit like groping for the elephant and accidentally grabbing your own leg and saying, this is what it's like. Okay, so Newman, and we're in a place that has such a Newman history, was a pioneer of recovering imagination as a way of the mind encountering reality, providing a wider explanatory function of the bigger picture. And he influenced Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien. Their imaginative works like Lord of the